Hey, it's been forever since I've done a video. Welcome back. So I'm I'm a person who uses both FL Studio and Ableton Live regularly, like in conjunction with each other. So I wanted to go over some of the reasons you should use Ableton and some of the reasons you should use FL Studio. And it's just gonna be a short little video. Now, I'm an FL Studio kid. That's how I started doing the music production thing. I got a copy of FL Studio Fruity Edition from my grandmother when I was 14, and I've been using FL Studio ever since then, and I don't think I could live without FL Studio on my computer. And broadly speaking, everything you can do in one piece of software, you can do in the other one, and you won't be missing anything. Like if you buy one DAW or the other, you can do all of the things that you would want to do with the DAW. It's just some ways are just not intuitive, and I am a person who owns like full registered copies of both. And you'd think, oh, you don't need to buy another DAW if you have one, right? Well, I used to think that way. I did a video on my channel like going after Ableton users, but I love using Ableton. And the main reason I like using Ableton is I like the linear workflow so much better. To me, Ableton is laid out in a visually more obvious way. It's more similar to a like staff of music, which is the universe I'm familiar with as a classically trained musician. The linear workflow makes more sense to me. I have gotten quite familiar with using the loop-based workflow in FL Studio, and it is specifically great for like organizing like dubstep drum patterns, for example, or doing like big bass patterns for dubstep. Where the issues come with that though is like if you have all of your dubstep bass sounds in one pattern clip in FL, which is generally what I like to do because I'm weird and compulsive and I put everything in one place. Like if it's a dubstep bass sound, if dubstep basses, I put them all in one pattern and put them on the playlist. I don't separate everything into different clips. The issue that arises from that is you can't tell which sound is which on the mixer. Like if your tracks are labeled Serum 1, Serum 2, Serum 3, Serum 15, Serum 29, it's like you end up in a situation where you don't know which one is which and you have to like dig through your mixer, and yeah, you can like watch the indicators or whatever, but in Ableton it's a lot faster because you can just see, oh, this is the note that I want to edit, this is the sound that it is. It's like that's yeah. Reasons to use FL Studio over Ableton. Overall, it has more plugins and it's more powerful than Ableton in so many ways. It is in general a more powerful piece of software. It's easier to learn, like Save for Max MSP, which comes bundled with the Suite edition of Ableton Live. There is Ableton is just a weaker piece of software than FL Studio. And people will say that's not true, but they're wrong. FL Studio has more and better stock plugins than Ableton by a mile. The benefit of Ableton is that it's streamlined and easier to like get things down quickly. Like in FL Studio, you have to think about like which plugins you want to open and you have to link them to a mixer track, and in Ableton it will just do it all for you, and you will just, hey, this plugin has its own mixer track, that's fine. You can link it to a joint one with another plugin if you want to, but you don't have to like manually do that every time you open up a new instance of a plugin. It just does it, which is a standard thing in every DAW, except for FL Studio, which you have to manually link things. Something I like about Ableton that is better than FL Studio, in my opinion, is that sidechain is just from a drop-down menu. It's not, you don't have to link the visual little digital cables. I prefer the drop-down menu version of it. Yeah, it's the same thing in functionality. It's like, it's not like it's bad in FL Studio, and it's not like you can't do it. It's just like, I find it aggravating to go through every clip and say, oh, is this one linked to the sidechain? Yes, no. Sends in Ableton are just much better. You don't have to click on the send, you just have a knob on the mixer insert which will send how much you use to the send, and a lot of people just don't use sends in FL Studio because of this. And I am a big send enjoyer. I love using sends. I use them in every track. I use a send for sidechain for reverb and delay. So if I just set all the outputs to sends only and crank up send A, which I have set as my sidechain, and that's just how I do sidechaining in Ableton. You know, just with a compressor linked to the kick and snare, which I can easily group, and it doesn't take like a second thought. I'll just like drag it into a visual track. It's like practical little details like that that just make Ableton faster for me to use, and I can focus on details more easily. It's just easier to tell where something is coming from. And Ableton doesn't have all the windows opening up all the time. Like I don't have to hit function F12 every time I close FL Studio and save, right? I don't have to hit function F12 every time I close Ableton just to get rid of all of the windows. I just so I open it up and it like lags my computer out. Like that's not an issue you have in Ableton at all. They just close when you click on something else, which is like, why does FL Studio not do that? And I think the best thing about Ableton compared to FL Studio is MIDI integration in Ableton is just so much more intuitive. It does it automatically. Like using a launchpad is so good in Ableton. I mean, it's made for Ableton, so you would expect it to be, but I don't think I could live without the MIDI functionality in Ableton. Yes, MIDI functionality works in FL Studio, but you have to go around, you have to manually assign each button to each like parameter in the DAW, and it's a whole mess. Like you have to, for example, if you want to link like a knob in Serum to a MIDI keyboard, you have to click on the little thing that you would right click to get an automation clip to link it to a knob, when in Ableton you could just do it in the same way you would do it with any other parameter. I do think FL Studio is better in some ways though, because like when you right click on a thing, you can hit link to controller and just touch a knob, and then it'll just link to the controller. So I mean, there's some things that are just like, it's weird. The biggest thing I don't like about FL Studio when it comes to automation is you have to go to like a little button at the top if you're using a third-party plugin, and like right click and hit link to controller, whereas it's like, that's just annoying. It's like in FL Studio you have to go through a whole bunch of like menus just to access a simple feature. But broadly speaking, I find that I use FL Studio for like sound design, and then I will make a full song in Ableton, if that makes any sense. For audio editing, like the warping modes, Ableton destroys FL Studio easily. Like there's no getting around that. But given that you can load FL Studio as a VST inside of other DAWs, it just like, it makes the workflow so nice, man. It makes the workflow so nice. I'm working on a project right now where I record in my car, and that's what I'm doing, is I'm loading FL Studio inside of Ableton, and I'm just using Ableton and FL Studio conjunctly together. I'm using FL Studio to like organize sounds, because yeah, Ableton, people say it's better for audio editing. I don't really agree. Maybe that's just because I'm more used to FL Studio, but that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm taking the audio clips that I recorded of my car, which I'm going to use to turn into a dubstep track, similar to what I did with the microwave on my album, by the way. Go check out my album. But yeah, I'm using my FL Studio project to like create all of the clips and patterns, and then I'm bringing the clips into Ableton and just doing it in Ableton that way. Like doing the actual song itself inside of Ableton. Maybe I'm a little nuts. Maybe I'm insane for owning both. But like, you know, I am kind of insane.